When I checked into the Ravenwood Hotel, I didn't think twice about the key in my hand. But by morning, the room wasn't where I left it, and I wasn't the same person who had walked inside. The Ravenwood Hotel wasn't my first choice, but it was the only place with a vacancy on a rainy night in the middle of nowhere. The old man at the front desk barely looked up as he slid the key across the counter. "Room 304, he said in a monotone voice, his eyes lingering on the key for a moment before he added, "Stay inside after dark." I laughed nervously, assuming it was some small-town quirk. "Is it haunted?" I joked. He didn't laugh, or he didn't even blink. Just stay inside. The elevator creaked as it took me to the 3rd floor. The hallway was dim, lined with peeling wallpaper and flickering sconces. Room 304 was at the far end, its brass numbers tarnished and uneven. The key turned easily in the lock, and I stepped inside. It was a standard room, nothing special: a bed, a small desk, a chair, and a window overlooking the parking lot. But there was something about it that made me uneasy. The air felt too still, the silence too heavy. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to exhaustion, and climbed into bed after a quick shower. The rain outside lulled me to sleep, but I woke up sometime after midnight to an odd noise, a faint scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across the floor above me. I frowned. There wasn't supposed to be anyone on the 4th floor. The clerk had mentioned it was under renovation. The scraping stopped as abruptly as it started. I told myself it was nothing and forced myself back to sleep. When I woke the next morning, something was off. The sunlight streaming through the window felt colder, sharper, and when I looked outside, the parking lot was gone. In its place was a sprawling, misty forest. Confused, I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 7 a.m., but there was no signal. When I stepped out into the hallway, I froze. It wasn't the same hallway. The walls were darker, the wallpaper shredded in places. The flickering sconces were replaced by strange rusted lanterns that barely lit the corridor. The air was thick, metallic, and the door to room 304 was no longer behind me. I turned a corner and saw a man standing at the end of the hallway. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by the dim light. "Excuse me," I called, relief flooding me at the sight of another person. "Can you help me?" He didn't move, didn't even react. I took a step closer and his head snapped toward me so fast I stumbled backward. His face wasn't human. His eyes were hollow, his mouth stretched impossibly wide. He let out a guttural sound and started walking toward me. No, not walking, gliding. Panic surged through me as I bolted in the opposite direction. Doors lined the hallway, each one numbered differently than before. 202, 415, 509. But they didn't match the floor I'd been on. I tried several handles, but none of the doors would open. The man's footsteps echoed behind me, steady and relentless. Finally, I reached a door marked Exit. I threw it open and found myself in the same hallway I'd just left. "No," I whispered, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The lights dimmed further, and the air grew colder. The whispers started then, faint but unmistakable, coming from the walls themselves. "Stay inside. Stay inside." Desperate, I flung myself against a door marked 104, and it opened. I slammed it shut behind me and turned to find myself in a room identical to the one I'd left, room 304. The whispers stopped. The next morning, I packed my bags and fled the hotel without looking back. The clerk at the desk wasn't the same old man from the night before. This one was younger, and his face was blank, as though he hadn't slept in years. "I hope you had a pleasant stay," he said in the same monotone voice. I didn't respond. Months have passed since that night, but I can't stop thinking about the Ravenwood Hotel. Every time I look in the mirror, I notice something different. A wrinkle that wasn't there before. A strand of white hair. The nights are the worst, though, because sometimes I wake up to find myself back in room 304, and I'm afraid that one day I won't wake up at all. Some doors should never be opened, and some places should never be found. The night the sky split open, it felt like the world had drawn its last breath. At first we thought it was just another storm, until the stars disappeared and the darkness began to move. I was out on the porch when it happened, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and watching the clouds roll in. The air felt heavier than usual, like the sky was pressing down on us. The crickets, usually loud this time of year, had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. It started with a sound, low and guttural, like the groan of shifting earth. I looked up just in time to see it, the sky tearing open, jagged and uneven, like someone had ripped through black fabric. Behind the tear wasn't the usual star-speckled void of space. It was something else entirely, a deep, swirling nothingness that seemed to pulse, alive and watching. The first scream came from the house next door. Old Mr. Hanley stumbled out onto his lawn, clutching his head. "Don't look at it!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Close your eyes. Don't let it see you." But it was too late for him. He dropped to his knees, his face frozen in a silent scream, staring up at the crack as his body went limp. I should have run inside then, slammed the door, locked it and hid, but I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on the sky. The edges of the crack writhed like they were alive, and the darkness within seemed to seep outward, spreading like ink into the clouds. My neighbor Lily ran out from her house, her toddler in her arms. "What's happening?" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to answer, but my throat felt like it had closed. She made the mistake of looking up, and her scream was worse than anything I'd ever heard. She turned and bolted back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The crack pulsed, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving inside it, a shape, massive and twisting, impossible to fully comprehend. The darkness seemed to spill down from the sky, like tendrils reaching for the ground. That's when the voices started. Soft at first, like whispers carried on the wind, but they grew louder, overlapping, endless, and in no language I could recognize. They weren't coming from outside. They were in my head. "You can't escape," one said, cold and echoing. "We see you now," another added, the tone almost mocking. I stumbled backward into the house, slamming the door shut and pulling the curtains tight. But it didn't help. The voices were inside, burrowing deeper into my mind with every passing second. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I lit a candle, its flickering light barely holding back the shadows that seemed to move on their own. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I grabbed it, desperate for connection. There was a message from Lily. "It's inside the house. Don't let it touch you." A noise came from the hallway, soft, like something dragging across the floor. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. There, in the shadows, was a figure. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its form was shifting, constantly changing, as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, glowed faintly, 2 pinpricks of light in the darkness. The whispers in my head grew louder as it moved closer. "Join us," they said. "See what lies beyond." I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door and shoving a dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the candle. The whispers were deafening now, like 1,000 voices screaming at once. Outside, the crack in the sky seemed to widen, the edges stretching farther apart. More of the darkness spilled out, swallowing the stars, the moon, and eventually, the world itself. I don't know how long I've been here, hiding in the dark. The whispers are still there, softer now, but constant. They tell me things I can't repeat, things about the world, about what's beyond it, and about what's coming. The crack hasn't closed. It's still there, somewhere above me, waiting. And I can't help but feel like it's watching me, waiting for me to look up again. Some doors should never be opened. The sky wasn't meant to crack. The journal was brittle with age, the ink smudged, but the words still carried the weight of madness. "It rises from the sea," the keeper had written in shaky letters. "And soon, it will take me too." The lighthouse stood like a solitary sentinel on the jagged cliffs of Blackthorn Point, its beacon long extinguished. They called it the Widow's Light, named for the countless sailors who had met their end in the icy waters below. When I arrived to document its history for my book on maritime legends, I didn't expect to find much more than crumbling stone and rusted gears. The locals were eager to share their tales, too eager almost. Every story they told had the same unnerving theme. The keeper disappeared without a trace. Not a single one of them knew his name, but they all remembered the day the light went dark. The townsfolk had gone to investigate, only to find the tower abandoned. No sign of a struggle, no body. Just the light extinguished, and his quarters eerily undisturbed. It was the journal that changed everything. I found it in a dusty drawer tucked beneath the keeper's rickety bed, buried under yellowed papers and sea charts. The leather cover was cracked, the pages damp from years of sea air. But the entries were still legible. They started out mundane, weather reports, maintenance logs. But then, halfway through, the tone shifted. April 3rd. The fog returned today, thick and black, like oil. It wasn't on the horizon this time. It was circling the tower. I swear I heard voices coming from it, faint but persistent. I told myself it was just the wind, but I'm not sure I believe that. April 5th, the voices were louder tonight. They called my name. How could they know my name? Reading those words sent a chill down my spine. But I dismissed them as the ramblings of an isolated man, slowly succumbing to loneliness. It wasn't until I spent my first night in the lighthouse that I began to understand. The fog rolled in just before midnight, as thick and black as the journal described. The air turned bitterly cold, and the world outside the window vanished into an inky void. That's when I heard it, faint at first, like a low hum. It wasn't the wind. I stepped outside onto the balcony, clutching a flashlight. The beam barely penetrated the fog, but I could feel something out there, watching. The hum grew louder, shifting into something almost human. The voices were garbled, overlapping, as though dozens of people were whispering all at once. Then I heard it clearly, my name. "Oh, is there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The fog churned, swirling like a living thing, and then, for just a moment, I saw it. a massive shape lurking in the darkness, its outline barely discernible. It was too big to be human, too solid to be a trick of the light. My flashlight flickered, and the thing disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The next morning I combed through the journal again, desperate for answers. Toward the end, the entries became frantic, almost illegible. April 15th. It doesn't want the light. It wants me. I can feel it now, even in the daylight. Watching, waiting. April 20th. I hear it in my dreams. It shows me the depths, endless, dark, and cold. It's calling me home. The final entry was just 3 words, scrawled in bold, uneven strokes. I opened it. I didn't know what he meant by it, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I packed my things and left that afternoon, the journal tucked tightly under my arm. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the lighthouse shrink into the distance. The fog was creeping in again, but this time I saw something moving within it, something enormous, coiling and twisting like a serpent in the waves. I haven't been able to sleep since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the voices calling my name, and sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I see the fog pooling outside my window. Some lights should stay extinguished, and some depths should never be disturbed.